to ignorance and confusion. Three men arose from humble beginnings with a message of wisdom and hope for their troubled times. Three men who would eventually change the very face of humanity. But they just got a call from Robert Mueller. So, here are some other guys.
It's SongTalk Radio with Michael, Neil, Phil, and the gang.
Welcome to SongTalk Radio. This is episode 284. This is the show with songwriters. Something like that.
The song with showrunners, too.
Song with showwriters, show with songwriters, take your pick. Talking to other songwriters about the craft of songwriting. We share tips, tools, and techniques, and together we all become better at writing songs. I'm your host, Neil Modi, and with me are the nautical members of the SongTalk Radio Action Team, because I just came back from a trip on the East Coast, so I'm thinking nautical.
Okay.
We have Fathom Phil.
Oh, hello. Very excited to be here in all my fathomousness.
Not out of your depth?
Not every day, but
That's it. Good night, everyone.
That's it. That's all we have.
Short show, but good.
Fathomtistic. Okay. We have Masthead Michael.
Not so woody now, huh?
Yes. And what do I do with that?
Yes. Well, you're very upright.
Very proud.
Yes.
And handling our standing tall. And our social media tonight, we have Mayday Micah.
Feel free to use my mic.
Cool. And finally, last but not least, on the tech board, we have Reef Not Rita.
Yay!
That was great. She wasn't mic'd, but it echoed, and her voice sounded wonderful.
Yes.
If only she'd mic'd herself.
Yeah.
During the show, send in your comments, questions to @SongTalk Radio on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or feedback at songtalk.ca for the good old-fashioned email, and we'll share them with the audience. And please visit us at songtalk.ca. Find out how you can be a guest on the show. Jeff Alan Greenway is a film composer, singer-songwriter, and pianist from Pickering, Ontario. He has written music for film, worked as a session player, orchestrator, and arranger, released his own original album, Great Expectations, and wrote the score to the international documentary The Secret Life of Frogs, which won a Nature Award at the Cannes Media and TV Festival.
That was so one-sided.
What? It's all about Jeff?
No, all about frogs. Just from the frog's point of view.
What about toads?
It's a
They were
secret life.
lobbying outside.
Obviously funded by Big Toad.
Yes, must be. Welcome back to SongTalk Radio, Jeff.
Hey, Jeff.
Hello,
Thank you for having me.
Jeff's been on the show a number of times.
Do we have the numbers? Which ones?
Well, everyone
we
has
don't
been
have
on
the
a
numbers, per se.
number.
I'll do a
one is
search to
number.
see what...
Yeah, but the last time you were on the show, you did the
four times or
you
so.
did the all about modes, which was really fascinating.
I'd encourage everyone at home to look that one up because it was a really good episode.
It was an awesome episode. Went
Thank
through a whole bunch of different things. So Jeff, you made the transition now from singer-songwriter to film composer, and I suspect the film composer was always kind of there, wasn't it?
It was actually
how's that going?
First composition I wrote when I was 6 years old. It was called Cars in a Junkyard.
Cool.
My piano teacher actually made me write a composition. I just remembered that the other day. It's actually funny. So I started piano when I was about 3.
Wow.
And I was mostly playing classical music and that sort of thing. But early on, I had a real love for film scores, especially Ennio Morricone, John Williams. Star Wars, of course, blew my mind.
Yes.
And it was always in the back of my mind, even when I was doing the singer-songwriter thing. And actually, the first pieces I wrote on keyboard were also instrumentals because I couldn't actually sing. I had a terrible voice when I first started writing as a teenager.
Okay.
So I wrote sort of electronic music with drum machine and that sort of thing.
Right. And then, but then at a certain point, like when we met several years ago, you were very much into the singer-songwriter thing at that time.
Yeah.
So how did that transition take place?
Yeah, well, I guess I'm not getting any younger. And the nice thing about the composition side of things is, Ennio Morricone is, 97 now or something like that? And still writing.
Still
80s or 90s, don't quote me on that.
He's
but
up there, though,
yeah, it's the kind of thing you can do forever. And I actually told myself early on that this was what I wanted to do eventually.
Okay.
I wanted to try, the singer-songwriter thing for as long as I was happy doing it. The other thing is I had a real mental block sort of the last couple of years I was doing the singer-songwriter side of stuff. I couldn't think of lyrics. I wrote it must have been 40, 50 songs, and I could not come up with lyrics for them.
So you had the music for them.
Yeah, and it was a real struggle. And I thought, okay, well, why not just write the music? You know?
Right.
So that was another big influence.
Okay.
Let's talk about you went actually like you just didn't start composing stuff for film. You actually like took some courses, I think, didn't you? Or
Yes, yeah. Well, my original grounding in music was at Humber College, so I studied jazz there. But they also had an excellent arranging course with John McLeod from the Boss Brass.
Oh, wow.
He ran sort of like a big band, small ensemble arranging course. So we learned how to write for big band. We learned how to write for small string ensemble, that sort of thing. So that's kind of where it started, and I became really interested in that because they had live performances too of the stuff that we wrote. And that's when I started experimenting on the computer with really, really bad samples because this was like 2006 or something like that. The interest was always there. I was still pursuing the singer-songwriter thing, but that's how it started. And then when I became serious about it, I decided to take a Berklee course. Berklee Online has a lot of really fantastic composition and orchestration courses and film and TV courses. So I took advanced film and TV there. And then I also studied orchestration at the Canadian Film Centre with John Herberman, which
let's talk
again
about
is a
Berklee
fantastic
Online.
course.
What was that like? What did that involve?
Berklee Online?
Yeah.
It was a 2-semester course, so it was basically about a year kind of school. But they have all sorts of different things you can take. You can actually take a degree online in film music if you want to. And I know friends of mine have actually gone to Berklee. I couldn't afford that, of course, right? So and my interest was more getting the necessary knowledge rather than pursuing a degree. So that's why I decided to go for the TV and film course. But it was really, really intensive. Basically, we had to watch one genre for a week. So it was like drama, action, whatever. Each week was a different genre. And by the end of the week, we had to write a cue for that genre. And we also had other assignments during the week, but it was a lot of work. We had to, at the end of it, we had to have a finished, polished cue that we had to upload.
What is a cue?
Yeah, good question. A cue is a short piece of music which is synchronized to film. And when you watch any movie, Star Wars, whatever, you'll notice that the music it doesn't flow through the entire film. So there are breaks. So for instance, the big fight between Obi-Wan and Darth Vader, that would be one cue. So basically they're usually about 1 to 2 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer in length. And it's basically for one scene of the movie. And then it changes and goes on to another.
Is that the same,
cue.
what they call underscoring?
Underscoring is more sort of simple writing because it's written underneath dialogue. So, so when you write under dialogue, the music has to be very, very sort of static. So you can't have a lot of rhythm going on. You can't have a lot of melody. Otherwise, it takes away from the dialogue. So that's really what an underscore is.
Okay, so for cues, there's no dialogue.
Cues, no, there can be dialogue as well. Cues can kind of flow, right? There can be a big action scene with no dialogue, and then the music's all out. You got big drums and orchestra and that sort of thing. And then, the characters might talk a bit. The music comes down again, and it goes back up again, for the big fight scene or something like that.
Okay. And so how long was the course? Like, how many hours did you have to put into it?
Well, it was 2 semesters. Basically, for each week, I would say I probably put in a good 10 to 12 hours on the material.
Wow.
Does it cost if you're not getting a degree to take it?
Yes. Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's not a free course, but it's really, really well run. The gentleman who runs the course, his name's Ben Newhouse. He's an LA composer. He's actually in the industry. I think he wrote the NBC theme or something like that. Excellent teacher. One of the best teachers I've
Is it like
had.
video lectures, that type of thing?
Yeah. There's video lectures, and then they send you links. You can go online. You can view clips from movies. One of the things that was really fascinating about that course is they actually show you the scores. So they showed, for instance, a scene from Jurassic Park by John Williams. We got to watch the scene, and then we actually saw the full orchestral score of that.
So is it a prerequisite, or at least recommended, that you know how to read sheet music?
Yes.
Like that?
Yeah. You do have to have a solid grounding in theory.
Right.
They do suggest orchestration as well, that you have some experience with orchestration.
Right.
I've kind of done everything backwards and upside down in my education process in this, because I did the orchestration after I did this course.
Right.
So it's a bit of a baptism by fire. The first thing we had to do was do a film trailer, and I didn't even know how to write a film trailer. So I was madly scrambling, trying to, look up stuff online and listening to what other people wrote and that sort of thing.
So how do you write a film trailer?
It's not easy. It's almost like writing a mini film, right? There's so many things going on you have to look at because it's so many clips and it's usually very fast paced and you have to figure out, it has to be exciting. It has to kind of build to a big finale usually, right?
So how do you do it? Like, do you get like sort of like the length and then sort of figure out where the cue points are?
Yeah, so you have to analyze it. Usually the hardest thing for me is finding a tempo, and there's a lot of different ways to do it. But even sometimes in one scene, there can be a number of different tempos. It's not always consistent all the way through. Usually trailers are. There's like what you do is you look at the edit points. You look at the edit points and where are the scenes actually switching? Where's the camera switching? Okay. And you can kind of base your tempo usually on that. Mm-hmm. And then once you've got that, then you look at, okay, what do I need to hit? Okay, there's a big fight scene, somebody punches somebody else in the face. Okay, so that's going to be a hit point, right? So
is it ever the case where the edit is usually locked in place and then the music is done to that? Or is there ever some kind of back and forth where some music is written and then it goes back to the editor and say maybe they switch some of the edit points based on the rhythm of the music? Yeah,
well, they say nowadays there's no such thing as a locked picture, which is unfortunately kind of true. It used to be in the old days, the picture had to be finished before the composer was writing music to it because it was so difficult to change it afterwards. Of course, you were recording with an orchestra and it was costing tens of thousands of dollars or hundreds of thousands of dollars. But now, because it's so easy to edit something in Final Cut or whatever, often you get what they say is a locked picture and they're like, oh, we just changed this one thing. Yeah. And then you got to change your whole score. So, but of course, that's also easier now too because of the advent of computers, right? Most of it's done on computers now. Editing the music is also a lot easier. But it's tricky when you have like a theme, you have a melody going on and all of a sudden they've taken out 30 seconds or, 10 seconds of the scene. It's okay, how do I take 10 or 30 seconds out of this music and still make it work, right? Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, usually it is locked picture, although there's a lot of interesting variations of how music is written. One of them was Interstellar with Hans Zimmer. Right. He was actually told to write the music without ever seeing a frame of film. Oh. So Christopher Nolan asked him to write a theme, and he explained what it was for, but he didn't explain the movie. He just kind of gave him a visual interpretation through words of what it is he wanted. And then Hans Zimmer had to write sort of a main theme without ever seeing any of the film. And then afterwards, he put it to film.
But that was just the kind of a theme for it, or not the whole film? Obviously.
Yeah, I don't believe it was the whole film. I don't know the entire story with that, but I think he did do a lot of the music sort of separate from the film, and then it was incorporated to the film, and of course matched up and rearranged.
Right. And of course, that's a very unusual process. Like
it's not that common. There are some other composers who have done that. Right. Often it's when the composer is really, really well known, and the director has a really good relationship with them, and they know they can come up with something. They also think that it might sort of spark some inspiration for them as filmmakers by hearing the music for what it is they envision.
I believe David Lynch and Angelo Badalamenti, where Lynch gives him some kind of sensorial words before he even sees the picture.
Right.
On occasion, just to make some soundscapes, which then Lynch works from.
Yeah.
Of course, and the famous bit about locked picture is the 2001, the original. Because what they would do before is they would actually have music that they would actually edit to. Yeah. But it was just music they put in place, and it would be replaced by a written score, but just so that they could get to a finished piece, so that they could give it to a composer to actually write. And what was in especially the scene with the spaceship going into the space station, which is the Blue Danube, that was actually the cutting music, and the composer actually wrote music for it, and he actually got fired. And he was actually talking about what it was like to being fired, and in the industry, it's like you actually aren't a film composer until you've been fired, because basically everyone's been fired.
It does happen.
And he says now, but I mean that's like a classic bit of movie lore is this perfect this classical music with space, which no one had done before.
But apparently the score was actually quite good. It's a shame that they threw it out. But of course, the movie's forever associated now with classical music.
They'll never release a re-edit of that. It also reminds me of that. It was Radiohead's Paranoid Android, where they did this really crazy video to it, but they gave the video editor, it was as an animated video, and Radiohead gave the song to the animator without the vocal track. So it was just the instrumental bed.
Oh, yeah.
And they did this video that had, I mean, ostensibly nothing to do with the lyrical content of the song. Right?
Interesting.
But then came up with, but like you say, it inspires something different. Like you never know what you're going to get, right?
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
So before you actually took the Berklee course, you actually know you've already done some arrangements for strings and small orchestra, so you had an idea basically how this all works.
Yeah, I had done some sort of small band arrangements for my own music as well as other singer-songwriters. Throughout the time I was at Humber and also afterwards, I did a lot of session work. And some of that session work was playing keyboards, but some of it was also arranging, live strings, live brass, that kind of stuff as well.
Right.
So I'd done it on a small scale. So I kind of had an idea, but I was really blown away when I saw all, what you need to do with, 40, 50 instruments.
Yeah.
Because it gets a lot more complicated.
Because, with computers now, like we all have theoretically an orchestra at our hands, so you can throw something together that kind of sounds okay on the computer, but then you actually would have to transcribe that into proper notation. Which,
if you want live musicians,
Yes.
Did you have to do that as well?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I did have to learn how to do that, and I did actually write out. I did a live orchestra recording last fall with the Screen Composers Guild, where I had to actually write out a full score, and it was recorded by the U of T Orchestra.
Wow.
That was a big learning experience, and it was wonderful. That was the first time I really had to write out a full orchestra score, and
so
that was.
Was there
scary.
sort of a sonic difference between doing it? Was there anything surprising? Like you wrote all the parts via computers, synthesized instruments, and then when you gave it to the orchestra, did it pretty much sound like you expected it to, or was it something different?
Yeah, it wasn't a really complicated piece. It was kind of like for a sad scene from a dramatic TV show, and so it was a very sort of muted, somber kind of piece. So it wasn't something that used a lot of the orchestra, and it wasn't very complicated. So it actually came out sounding quite nice. And the interesting thing is when you actually write it out, you write out all the different parts for the different instruments. It really forces you to think more than when you're actually just playing it into your DAW. I had written certain parts, and then I was trying to figure out how to actually transcribe it. I'm thinking, well, that doesn't really look right.
Yeah.
So, and then, when you're looking how the instruments fit together and where they go and that sort of thing, and you start making changes, and it actually makes it better. It makes it better. It makes it more musical.
Right.
Things fit better together. Yeah. So it really does help. I actually write out sketches of, if I have especially large scenes where there's a lot going on, I'll write out a sketch of the major parts of the orchestra just to make sure everything sort of fits together as well. So if it's something simpler, I actually record it in by hand, and a lot of composers do that. But
So why don't we talk about how the Secret Life of Frogs project came about?
You brought some music, right? Is
I
there
did.
anything we can
I
listen
did.
to? What pieces have you brought?
Yes. Well, because we're kind of talking about the process of going from singer-songwriter to film music, I brought one of my singer-songwriter pieces. It's a song called "I Need," which I released in 2016, as well as a couple of film samples, actually from The Secret Life of Frogs.
Okay.
Okay. How about we listen to the singer-songwriter?
Yeah, we'll
and
do
then come back
singer-songwriter
and
first, and we'll come
then
back.
we can talk a bit about the
Okay.
Frog movie.
All right, so let's take a listen to "I Need."
I need a love, not a hand to hold. I need a love, I don't need a good soul. I need a love, I need the spark and the fire. I don't need to be told what it is I desire. And as I step away from all that she can say, she says, I need a love, just alone. And I need love. And I don't care what it takes. I'll bend this friendship till it breaks. She doesn't need this love I bring. She's looking for some other thing. She says, I need love. Don't come home. And I gave all I can, and I met the demands. But somehow I still worry that she's waiting for me to rescue her from herself. And she still can't say I'm sorry. So I say I need a love. I need a heart I can hold. I need a love. I need a good soul. And as she steps away from all that I can't say, I say I need a love. Please come home. Said I need a love. Please come home.
Hey, that was I Need by Jeff
Brilliant
Alan
song.
Greenway. And you did the orchestrations
Thanks.
for that?
I did, yes. Actually, I played all the instruments on that except for the bass.
Okay.
Why not
on.
the bass?
I suck at the bass.
You played the drums?
I actually did play the drums, yeah, MIDI drums. But
Okay, cool.
yeah.
So is there a connection, now that you listen to it, between what you were doing then in the song and where, you know, your eventual career path into composing for soundtracks and whatnot?
Bridge the gap for us, Jeff.
Thank you. That's a much more succinct way of putting
Yeah.
it, Neil. Thank you.
So from this song?
Yeah,
do you mean-
or the singer-songwriter
time
thing
when
in
you,
general.
You know, when you were
Yeah.
making that music.
Yeah, well, I you know what? This song and actually the other single that I released in 2016 both had a lot of strings in them, and you know, I loved writing for strings. Actually, the other one had a real string section, whereas this one is sort of synthesizer strings. You know, the more I kind of played different parts and I wrote different parts, the more I sort of became interested in doing the film score thing. And what I did is I dug up all this old stuff that I did back when I was back at Humber, when I was kind of experimenting with film scores, and I realized that like buying good samples to use on your computer to make it sound like a real orchestra is very expensive. And East West, which is a company, a major company that sells samples for computer, had a subscription. They just brought out a subscription service, so you could actually pay by the month as opposed to dropping $10,000 on orchestra samples. So I signed up for that, and I was amazed at the quality of the sounds, and I tried them with some of my old orchestra stuff, and it was really inspiring. So I decided to continue with that. I took those songs first, I uploaded them, shared them with friends. People are really positive and supportive about it. So I thought, okay, maybe I'll give this a shot. So I kind of gave it a year, and I thought, okay, I'll study this for a year, I'll work on it, I'll see how good I get. And it just kind of went from there. It's like I loved it. It was a really big change, and it was a really big inspiration for me.
Is there anything compositionally that sort of touches both spheres, or is it a whole different thing when you're composing music as opposed to when you're writing quote unquote songs?
It's not that different. I mean, obviously, orchestra music is much more complicated. But when you listen to some of the scores, especially when you're talking about underscores, under dialogue and that sort of stuff, TV work, a lot of it is very simple. It's simple chord progressions. It's something that anybody really could do. It's the really big sort of John Williams, Hans Zimmer kind of stuff, which is harder. Writing a suite or writing a sonata or something like that is harder.
So when you're writing songs and you're composing, you're basically like you're starting with chord progressions.
Well, I think it's a natural progression. I mean, look at how many songwriters also progressed to film score. There's so many of them: Trent Reznor, Hans Zimmer, Danny Elfman, and even John Williams started in jazz. He was a jazz composer working under Henry Mancini.
I didn't know that.
So
Did he do the Elephant Walk?
It works. Yeah, Mark Mothersbaugh.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of. I think it's kind of a natural progression. I think some people too. Like I think Danny Elfman got bored of pop music.
Yeah,
and he's a manic kind of guy, and he's very creative, and he really wanted to expand beyond that.
And Oingo Boingo wasn't necessarily that poppy either.
They weren't that straightforward anyway.
True.
If you get bored with that, you got a hell of a match.
I think one of the problems with pop music is there is a formula within reason that you have to create within, but there's actually no other boundaries. I mean, it's just like, what you're inspired about or what you want to write about. And sometimes it's nice to actually have something that you have to write for, that you have to, like we have this scene, it needs to do this, you need to get this information, this emotion out. It's nice to have that kind of prodding to get you working at it. It's a different kind of inspiration as opposed to, it's great to be able to write songs when you're heartbroken, but after a while your heart doesn't get broken that much.
Yeah.
So it's kind of hard to sort of get that rawness, and I think, which is why there's people who are very often, they're songwriters when they're really young, but as they get older, they tend sometimes not to do it because you just tend to not have those, those super burning emotions.
Yeah, and when I did my first short film, I was amazed at how much I was inspired by the scenes. So I had to write, like a music for a romantic scene or for a death scene, something like that. And it actually really brought all sorts of ideas into my head that I might not have thought of just on my own. So it is quite different writing for film because you have to support the picture, right? It's not really about you; it's about the picture. So whatever you write has to fit with the director's vision, has to fit with the emotion in the scene, and there's so many things to consider. But it's also really, really open to interpretation. Every composer would come up with something different for that.
Right. And speaking of interpretations, we'll be back right after these messages. Okay, for those just joining us, you're listening to SongTalk Radio. We're streaming on songtalk.ca. And tonight our guest is singer-songwriter and composer Jeff Alan Greenway. Don't forget, we love to hear from you even during the show. So go ahead, share your thoughts and questions with us at SongTalk Radio on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram, or send an email to feedback@songtalk.ca. We'll share your thoughts and answer your questions right here on the show. And coming up on SongTalk Radio next week, August 6th, it's going to be a repeat show. Surprise, surprise, surprise. We don't even know what it is yet, but something will be there. That's for our live stream listeners. There will be nothing on the podcast. And August 13th, the week after, music publishing with Margaret McGuffin of the Canadian Music Publishers Association.
Yay. That's going to be a great one.
That'll be an interesting show.
It'll be a show where I realized I've lost a lot of money.
Yes.
Another one of those shows.
No.
She'll be bringing in songs about publishing.
Like they say, there's tens of dollars to be made in the music industry.
That's right.
And if you're in the Toronto area, please join us. Our next Song Talk meetup is on Thursday, August 22nd from 7 to 10 p.m. at the Transat Club. That's in the Annex area of Toronto. It's free to join on meetup.com and free to attend the meetup. Stop by songtalk.ca for the link.
Yay.
Well done. Excellent.
Thank you, Michael. Any news bits there, Phil, Michael?
Not so much, other than the fact that I saw the movie yesterday on the weekend, and I advise everyone. Not yesterday, but a couple of days ago.
The day before yesterday, you saw yesterday?
Definitely well worth seeing. A much better movie than you'd think, and definitely check it out.
And do you have to be a Beatles fan to enjoy that movie?
No. But you do realize how great songwriters they were.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. It's fun. Lots of inside musician jokes. So I think it's
that would be good.
Kind of yeah.
because we're really funny people.
Yeah,
We are.
way to nerd out.
But it's just getting back to what Jeff was saying, because in my business, I have an advertising marketing business, and I always tell my clients, I'm not a fine artist. I don't paint on the weekends. I need someone's challenge, like they don't understand their product, or people aren't understanding their service. I need that kind of instruction. I want a paycheck. Well, but it's actually having that kind of inspiration, that kind of challenge, that framework helps me actually create. Otherwise, like I'm not interested in painting or doing anything visual. That's just not what I do.
Yeah, and there are circles in Toronto, especially these songwriter circles that people go to, and they get a weekly or a monthly assignment.
Yes,
right.
Yeah.
And they say, well, this month we're going to write a song about cats.
Yeah,
or something, right? And
it's good to have some kind of framework.
Away. Or they give you something really vague, which is interesting because everyone comes back with a different thing. But that's edging towards that sort of idea where it's not coming from within you. It's an assignment.
I think that happens when you have a goal. It helps to focus your creativity and your attention.
I wanted to get into a question. Sorry, Mike, I'm sorry. Did you have a question?
Maybe we're going to ask the same question. So what is the actual process? Like, how does it work from when you get a commission? How do you work with the director? What is how do you exchange ideas? How do you deliver rough drafts, or how does that all work?
You talk about in the context of the Secret Life of Frogs.
Sure. Yeah. Well, that one was a bit of an anomaly because I was actually communicating with the directors in India. So we actually corresponded by email, right. Which is not normal, really. The film I did previous to that, which was a short horror film called Snip, was more of a traditional process. I can kind of explain both, but usually what happens is the director or the producer are the ones that usually hire you. They both usually have to agree to bring you on. And then you get together with them, you discuss the vision of the film. They will usually give you a rough cut, right, to kind of show you what's happening. They'll give you a script usually so you can read through it. And then, you have to wait usually for the final cut before you can actually really start composing. But you can start coming up with ideas, and I always do that. So I'll see a scene from the rough cut that they've given me, and I'll start thinking of ideas of music that would fit with that scene. But I won't fully sort of write it out. I'll just kind of sketch it out. And then when I get the final cut of that, then of course I would build the whole thing.
You take that approach where you're like, I don't know what it's called. I don't know if they call them motifs or whatever, but like you build a theme for each character kind of thing, or each kind of aspect of the film.
Yeah, well, yes, John Williams was the master of motif. With a short film, I haven't done a feature film yet. I should mention that, because that's where you really run into that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
In a short film, you can't have too many different motifs flying around, because usually the film's anywhere from 5 minutes to 30 minutes in length, or 20 minutes. So usually you'll have like one or two themes that come back. And sometimes it's not always based on a character. Sometimes it might be, the theme, like a love theme between two characters or something like that, and then that comes back again. Or it might be, a theme that kind of describes a place, right, in the film. And then when that place comes back again, that theme comes back again. So it isn't always connected with a character, but you can do motifs connected with characters. Just you can't have like 10 different motifs in a short film, because then it really kind of stands out and it's a bit jarring.
But certainly, even no matter how short the film is, you will have recurring musical ideas.
Yes,
it's not going to be something different at every moment, unless maybe that's what the film calls for. But I don't think. That's probably not normal, is it? Yeah,
well, it depends on what the director wants, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes directors want strange things. Like comedy music with horror film, that kind of thing. Right. What is it? Clockwork Orange is a great example of that. Using music against what's actually happening in the film. But to get back to what I was talking about, the process. The other thing that happens is what they call spotting sessions. So you'll sit down with the director, look through the movie once they have the final cut. And they will tell you, or you'll discuss where they want the music. So they'll say, okay, this part, no music, right? It's mostly dialogue. And then, 1 minute, 25 seconds, that's where we want 30 seconds of music, that kind of thing. So you divide it up. They'll tell you how many cues they want, how long they want, that kind of thing. And the two of you kind of discuss what kind of music would suit it. And then you start sending them rough drafts of things, right? So you wouldn't score the whole film.
Type thing?
Sorry?
Is like just MP3s?
Often what it is it's kind of like a rough mix combined to picture. So like, for instance, with one of the action films that I did. I scored an action sequence. It was kind of like a boxing sequence in the film. And I just scored that, exported that as a rough file, synced it to picture, just that scene, and sent it to the director, just to make sure they're okay with the way it's going.
How did you sync it to picture?
I did it in iMovie. There's lots of different ways you can do it, but basically, you just you have to make sure that it's exported at the right time. It has to be synchronized.
Right.
But you can sort of cut the clip and then you put in the music that you wrote.
When you're writing, you're working in, what program are you working in? Logic?
I'm working in Logic. Yeah.
So can you actually import the rough cut of the video into Logic and score along to that?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it actually works really well with that. Most composers I know either use Logic or Pro Tools.
Right.
But Logic, I've been told, I'm not an expert in Pro Tools, but Logic is a little better with sort of working with MIDI. So you have a little bit more flexibility with that, but they both work really well with video.
Right.
So you go back and forth, like you show them the rough cut, and you sort of say, that's good, that's bad, change this. And how many times does it go back and forth?
Many.
Oh, really?
And many fingers get in the pie. Many hands get involved in the cooking. I had an interesting journey with the short horror film that I did. They said they wanted music. They didn't specify anything, so I wrote a horror score because it was a horror film. Right. And they said, no, it's too horror. So I changed it up. They said they wanted something a little bit more dramatic. So I said, okay, throw out the horror score, write some dramatic music. And then it was too dramatic. So after a lot of back and forth and different input from the producer, the director, and the assistant producer, and all these other people, it turned out what they wanted was electronic music. They wanted synthesizers, they wanted drones and things like that. Less music, more almost, I would say, atmosphere, sound design.
And sometimes that's the case. You need to give the client anything, and then they decide that's not. They need to hear what they don't want first.
Yeah,
to discover what they do want, because sometimes they don't know.
It's very frustrating.
It can be.
How do you find the language? I mean, directors are often very visual, and they're trying to talk to you about something that's very sound-centered.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, often they don't know how music works. They see it as sort of this magical process that takes place. Some directors, though, like John Carpenter, famously did his own music. They do have a background in music, and they understand sort of how to explain it a bit better. But yeah, it can be frustrating because they don't always know the language, and so you have to kind of work with them. And the best thing is always if there's a temp track, right, which is what we were talking about with 2001, where they kind of give you an idea of what they want. Or if they can give you examples, they send you some films. It's like, oh, I hear this sort of in the action scene. So that tends to help a lot. But yeah, it can be very vague sometimes, like we want scary music.
Because very often in my world, you'll have like many people getting their hands in the creative, and you see this great idea slowly getting sort of chipped away into something that's not as good, and it can be a very disheartening process.
Yeah.
Did you find that at all, or?
You can't. I find you can't get too attached to what it is you write. This happened on Secret Life of Frogs too. I wrote 5 cues for 5 different scenes, and they didn't like one of them. And they just said, can you write another cue? And I kind of liked it. And it actually fit with sort of what they'd given me as a temp track. And so I thought, okay, well, you know what? I'm going to keep this, and you maybe use it for something later or develop it, turn it into something else. And I rewrote the entire cue. So you do get that sometimes, and you can't get too emotionally attached to it. In the end, it has to be what works best with the picture, and you have to make the director and the producers happy. So there is always some back and forth and things that you have to change.
Did you have to work on, do you have, now how does this work? Do you sign a contract before you start? Or how does the negotiations work?
Yeah, ideally, that's what you should do. Often, because of time limits, things just start right away, and then you worry about the contract at the end. But you should start with a contract. There's been a lot of situations where
listen up, kids.
where they were busy with all sorts of things to do with editing and that sort of thing. So they say, oh yeah, we can send you a contract. Oh yeah, we can send you a contract, and it didn't happen right until at the end. Yeah. But
you could always work on stuff, but don't send them anything until you've signed a contract.
Yeah, you should sign a contract up front. And actually, Screen Composers Guild of Canada, just to give them a shout out, they're a fantastic organization for anybody who's thinking about getting into composition. And they actually have sample contracts for composers.
Oh, that's great.
Which are great. So you can adapt that to whatever it is you're doing. And that's what I used on the work that I did. And that way, you know that you're going to get paid. You know that you have rights to the music, or if you don't have rights to the music, it's all spelled out in the contract.
Right.
So there's a lot of things to keep in mind when you're writing music, because often the directors and producers don't know, especially if they're just starting out, they don't know all the complex sort of legalities regarding the score and the music. There's a big thing right now where they try to some companies are trying to take the producer's share and the songwriter's share or the writer's share away from the composer. And that's a big debate that's sort of going on with the Screen Composers Guild. So you have to kind of know how it all works, and it's definitely something you should read up on if you're thinking about getting into composition, because it's very different than, say, like a songwriting contract or doing an album or something like that.
Well, is it a bit like a writing contract where you have a number of drafts before more payments kick in?
Yeah, well, usually there's a number of different payment periods. So there's an upfront payment. Often it's like 25 or 50%. Sometimes, if it's in the case of like a TV series or something like that, there will be payments after each episode. Or so it depends on how each contract is set up. They're all different, but usually, like what I would suggest is to try to get some kind of upfront fee before you start the writing.
So how did the process work with the filmmakers in India then?
Yeah, well, that I actually did use one of the sample Screen Composers Guild contracts, reworked that myself, and then asked for basically 2 payments from them. So one, not right at the beginning, but after I was sort of halfway done the cues that I had to write, and then one at the end when it was all finished.
And you've brought in one of the pieces from that film, right?
Yeah, actually, I have two very
cues,
short cues. Did you guys want to talk about those?
Yeah. Let's set up the first one.
Can you set up the clip?
Okay, sure. Well, I think is the first one the Western Ghats?
Whichever one you like.
Yeah. Okay. So that's probably a good one to start with. That was.
Is this a documentary film?
Yeah. So I should explain a little bit about the way the film worked. So this is a film that was set in the rainforest of India. It was directed and produced by 2 brothers, Vijay and AJ Betty, in India, and they have a company called Betty Universal, which does nature films. And they actually spent, I believe it was 3 years in the rainforest researching frogs and getting wonderful footage. Like the footage was just amazing in this film. This particular scene is set in the Western Ghats, which are a mountain range in India, where they have a huge range of biodiversity. It's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and many, many different types of frogs and that sort of thing. So in this particular scene, it was actually them going into the mountains. So the first part of the cue, you'll hear it's kind of that's where they're sort of driving in the car, and then the music changes. That's where it goes to into the mountains, and there's an beautiful overhead shot of the mountains, looking down on waterfalls and that sort of thing, and then at the end it comes down into the forest. So you can, if you can kind of imagine that in your mind. Unfortunately, we can't see it on radio.
It's theater of the mind.
Theater of the mind. Theater of the mind.
Your music will guide us through that.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Let's take a listen. Nice.
That's great.
Thank you.
What's the title of that one?
Western Ghats.
Western Ghats.
Yeah.
Right. So you go back and forth, and then you arrive at this point. Now, does this get recorded by an orchestra, or do you deliver them a finished wave file, or what do you deliver to them?
Yes, this is all done on computer with samples. Obviously, if they got a big budget, then they would want like a real orchestra score. But the way things are done a lot these days, it actually is done much of it's done on computer. A lot of the TV stuff you see, for instance, because of tight schedules and that sort of stuff, a lot of it is done on computer. But it really depends on the budget. In this case, they didn't have a large budget for music, so it wasn't using a real orchestra. If they did, then I would have tried to do an orchestra recording. But the samples are pretty good these days, right? So you can make it sound orchestral without necessarily having an orchestra.
And those were the East-West you were talking about?
Yes, it's kind of a combination. I believe there's East-West and also Spitfire Audio. They have a really good
Is it Vienna?
series too. No, Albion 1.
Oh, okay. Vienna's another one.
But I suppose knowing how orchestras work makes them sound more real as well, yes?
Yes, yeah. You do have to sort of know the language of the orchestra and sort of where the different instruments go. And, at this point, I wasn't really that adept with orchestration. Most of it was sort of self-study and that sort of thing. This is actually before I took the orchestration course. I did this. So my orchestration is a little better now. But, I tried to go with things that I'd heard, things that inspired me. And they were very interested in the music from the Planet Earth series, which, of course, was Hans Zimmer. So they wanted that kind of a sound. So that's the reason behind
Those are
that.
kind of big shoes.
Yes.
And so you took the files and then you mixed them down yourself, or did you give them to them?
Yeah. So at the end of it, once everything was done and they were happy with the cue, what I did is did a final mix, final stereo mix, high quality, sent to them. But then you also do quite often in film music what they call stems, where you'll combine certain elements of the orchestra. Often it's sort of high instruments, medium instruments, low instruments, separate percussion tracks, that kind of thing, where they can do their own mixing on their end, right? Because sometimes they might find, for instance, the drums are too loud and it's interfering with something in the film, so they want to pull the drums down. So
because they're going to take your stuff. They're going to be adding sounds,
exactly,
dialogue, whatever else.
Yeah, so it gives them more flexibility.
Will they have to do a 5-1 mix?
They can do that. Often they'll do that on their own if they want to. Often the music still stays sort of stereo.
Right, so you're delivering stereo and stems, and then when they do their 5-1 mix for theatrical or for television, then that's just part of what they do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are some composers who actually do 5-1 mixes, and they have their studios set up for that kind of thing. Yeah. But I'm not there yet. That's next year.
Okay, so we have another cue. You want to set up this second cue?
Yeah, sure. So this is also from Secret Life of Frogs. So this is an interesting one. This is called Termites, and basically the main frog in this documentary is called the purple frog. It's very rare, and apparently nobody had really studied its life cycle before the two brothers went in. So they have exclusive footage of this thing, close-ups, and they followed its entire life cycle. It was really amazing. And this particular scene, he's having lunch. So he discovers this termite mound in the middle of the jungle. And at the beginning, it's a very dark scene, stormy. It's threatening to rain and that sort of thing. You see the termites milling around, and then all of a sudden close up on the frog, right? So it's a very dramatic scene. So it's got very dramatic, dark sort of music. And then he has lunch.
Right on. Okay, Termites.
So it has a happy ending.
Happy meal.
And lunch.
Termites by Jeff Alan
I've
Greenway.
never had a lunch that
Interesting combination of the synth bass with the symphonic background.
Very acoustic sounding percussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's kind of a Hans Zimmer-ish thing, isn't it?
Yeah. It's the inspiration definitely comes from there.
Yeah.
And I personally, I love hybrid scores. They call that a hybrid score in the industry, where it's electronic and it's orchestral. The two of them together.
It's like you're using like lots of rolled instruments too. That's another angle you can go at it, right?
Yep.
Because a lot of the percussion and stuff is, not European, so to speak, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because all the strings and the brass and everything is typically European instrumentation. I know. So, who's the composer for the Game of Thrones? Rajim.
Iranian, right?
Yeah.
Ramin Djawadi.
Ramin Djawadi. I remember going to see the Game of Thrones live concert experience, and there was so many bizarre, strange instruments he had in that thing. A lot of the percussion, we had these. Those big long Australian, what are they called? Didgeridoos and all sorts of wacky stuff.
Yeah, I saw Gladiator live, actually, Hans Zimmer, and they had the similar kind of thing. They had a choir and they had all sorts of exotic instruments. Yeah, it's wonderful hearing that kind of stuff and also learning about those instruments. That's something I'm still learning about, and it's fascinating.
Right. It's interesting. In the last two cues, I noticed there's no reverb.
There is some.
There is some. Very minor, and I sort of expect, especially with those taiko drums, which are, and I think mandatory in every score now by law. But like usually they're sort of surrounded by reverb to make them bigger, but there's no reverb on these.
There's sort of natural reverb. So the reverb that I'm using it's sort of sample modeled, I believe. I'm not sure what the proper term for that is, but it's sort of like an orchestra hall reverb. So it's not like
so it's sort of embedded in the sample.
Well, actually, there's natural reverb in the samples as well.
There's just ambience, the room sound.
Yeah, so then the recording itself will have some natural reverb, but I've also added sort of orchestra hall kind of reverb on top of that. But no, it's not. It's a different kind of reverb than what you would see in like a pop song or something like that, right? Often, unless you want to create a special effect in the score, you wouldn't. If it's traditional orchestra music, you wouldn't want to put like a really long reverb on anything.
No, because it would get all muddy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that also because you want to give them room when they do their final sound mix to place the music where they want with the sound effects?
That's part of it. Sometimes they can be specific about what they want to, and if you put in too many effects and that sort of thing, it can actually interfere with sound effects, dialogue, and that kind of thing too, right? So you have to be kind of aware of that. I think in my case, like in terms of these two cues, I sort of based it on what they were looking at in terms of samples from planet Earth and that kind of thing. So I was looking at the kind of reverbs, the kind of effects they used on
how many
those
cues were
recordings.
there altogether in the film?
I believe it's 5. They used some stock music as well, so there were some scenes that they actually
and
licensed.
The whole movie is how long?
I believe it's about 30 minutes.
Okay.
It's about 30 minutes long, yeah. Right. And it was just, it was actually just released on Discovery Channel and Animal Planet in India. Okay. And it's going to be released in North America this October in New York.
Oh, cool. So let us know when that's out, and we can
absolutely
link to it.
I assume all this stuff would be registered with SOCAN and that kind of thing, or
yes, yeah, it is registered with SOCAN.
So, as a composer, what I guess more famous composers would you think would be good to listen to? Would be instructive in terms of their their body of work?
There's so many out there.
Who are your favorites?
Yeah,
Hans.
Well, I mean, of course, the famous ones, John Williams, Ennio Morricone, are wonderful and masters. Right, they're real master composers. Hans Zimmer as well. Especially if you're into trailer music and big drums.
Yes.
And there's so many others too. Marco Beltrami, I love. Who did all the Pixar films? I've forgotten his name. Michael Giacchino, I believe. Is it Michael Giacchino? Yeah. There's so many, but those guys are masters at what they do. And if you like any of those films, I would strongly recommend trying to listen to some of those scores.
Any famous female composers out there?
Famous which? Sorry?
Female composers.
Yes. Yeah. Actually, who is it? Pinar Toprak, I believe, just did Wonder Woman.
Oh.
I believe it was Wonder Woman or was it Captain Marvel? I keep mixing those two up, but Captain Marvel for sure, possibly Wonder Woman.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, no, her music is fantastic.
And speaking of music,
Speaking of that,
our playing out music
on that note,
is on.
I think our band wants to go home.
all right, that is all the time we have tonight. So much more to talk about. This has been Song Talk Radio.
Oh, yeah.
Special thanks to our guest, Jeff Alan Greenway. And where can our listeners find more of your cues?
JeffAlanGreenway.com.
JeffAlanGreenway.com. Just spelled like it
Pretty
sounds.
straightforward.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you so
send-
much for having
How
me.
many L's in
thank you.
Alan? Sorry.
ALAN, 1 L.
Send us your impressions on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram at SongTalk Radio, or send us an email at feedback@songtalk.ca. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel for live performance videos and full episodes now. And please stop by the site at songtalk.ca. Subscribe today to the Song Talk Radio podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher.com, Spotify, Podcast Addicts, and don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter at songtalk.ca. You can find links to all the products, books, and web services we mentioned on Song Talk Radio on our resources page at songtalk.ca. We'll put a link up for East-West orchestral libraries. And if you're in the Toronto area, please join us. Our next Song Talk meetup is on Thursday, August 22nd from 7 to 10 p.m. at the Transact Club. It's free to join on meetup.com and free to attend the meetup. Stop by songtalk.ca for the link to the meetup. Thanks to Rita for handling the tech board
Thank you,
thingy
Rita.
today.
Thanks, Rita. That was great.
And thank you to Micah for handling our social medias.
Thank you, Mike.
Oh,
And
great
most
photos.
of all, we'd like to thank you, our devoted listeners. You can follow me at neilmodi.com. You can follow Phil.
The Phil Emery on Twitter.
And Michael, if he's on the grid,
I'm on the grid, but I'm off the radar.
off the radar. Okay.
Ooh, okay.
And Mr. Micah,
At Jimmy Micah on Instagram.
Jimmy Micah, and Rita.
No.
She's off the
She's
grid
off
as
the
well.
Similarly in hiding.
Yeah, and of course our guest, Jeff Alan
Witness
Greenway.
protection.
What's your favorite social media, Jeff?
Facebook.
Facebook, and you're Jeff Alan Greenway on Facebook?
Jeff Alan Greenway Music.
On Greenway Music on Facebook. And stop by the website, songtalk.ca, browse past shows, find out how you can be a guest. Keep on writing,
Keep on rocking.
keep on rocking in
Good
a
night,
free
everyone.
world.